Welcome back.
Welcome to Decision Space, the only show to take place right here, in the space between the turns in your favorite games. I'm Jake Friedman.
And I'm Brendan Hansen.
And this is the podcast about decisions in games.
And this is our exploratory conversation on games we've played the most. You know, Jake and I haven't decided yet if we're going to name this our top 10 each most played games, but we're going to just talk through our top 5 most played physical games and our most played digital games each to talk about what was compelling enough about these games and the decisions in them to keep us coming back. And part of the motivation here is we want to do a future conversation that's a full what we talk about episode on replayability, but we figured it'd be good to start just exploring into the space a little bit here by exploring our own personal use cases with replayability, what drew us to these games and why maybe in my case I played them over 500 times for one of the games. Oops. Or I guess not oops, so long as I had fun, but that's a lot of plays.
That is a ton of plays. Yeah, I think maybe we could start out with like a little bit of like a meta analysis of our own list, just like without diving into the games, just like if there's anything that jumps out to you about yours, and I'll do the same for mine. But before we do that, we should read a review because we have a really kind review that was sent in to us, was sent into Apple Podcasts. That's even better than being sent in to us, if I'm being honest, by Hokey Bird. Brendan, do you want to read this one?
I do. Okay. It's called A Great Source of Analysis and ... I love this podcast. As someone who loves board games and is infatuated with their design, this podcast offers a much needed avenue for true critique. Episodes dig much deeper than a simple "is it good" review and evaluate how a game works, why it succeeds or doesn't, and how the designers accomplish their goals. Hokey Bird, thank you so much for this 5-star review in Apple Podcasts. We appreciate it so much and it helps with discovery of the show. Also, I'm glad you appreciate our true critiques.
I think for me, I would probably give it a 10 out of 10 review. I think it was that good.
It was a great review. Same, 10 out of 10. Willing to read review anytime.
Yeah. So if you want to help us continue to grow our podcast, a great way to do it is to leave a review. But let's leave that there and jump into our main topic, a discussion of the games we've replayed the most.
Okay, so Jake, you talked about wanting to have a meta conversation. And I feel like something we have to get out of the way at the very beginning is just the time constraints of games, right? There's a reason why neither of us have a game that takes over 4 hours to play on our list. Just like there's a certain thing about replayability in games that like the shorter a game is, the more likely I'm going to have played it a ton if it kind of hooks my brain. Which isn't to say necessarily that like if there's a really long game that I really loved, it might not eventually get here. But for me, most of the games on my list tend to be medium or lightweight games.
That's true for me. And it brings up an important point that this list might be different. I'm not sure how different it would be, honestly, but I was thinking about the number of times I've played a game, right, for replayability, which is technically different than like number of hours spent in a game, right? If you play A Feast for Odin 4 times, that's equivalent time that you could play, Can't Stop 25 times.
Yeah.
And so that would mean Can't Stop would be the game making this list and not A Feast for Odin. So I do think there's something to be said for longer games. You don't have to play them as much to get just as much enjoyment out of them. So I don't want people listening to this think like, okay, these guys hate longer games, because I don't think that's what's going on here.
I don't think so either, but I think there is something interesting about not all short games that I ever play, right, end up being games that I replay a ton. So what is it about these short to medium weight games, even though I can, experience a full play of them in maybe less than an hour, what about them makes me want to keep coming back to them, maybe say 4 times rather than playing a game like A Feast for Odin? Not that I wouldn't play A Feast for Odin or enjoy it, but just like what specifically about these? But I think you're right. That's not like make a false equivalency between like just because we play it a lot means it's better. Yeah. I'm on the same page with you too. Do you think, I want to ask you, because I know Feast for Odin is one of your favorite games. Do you think that if you just looked at time played, it would compare equitably with some of these games on the list that you've played a lot? Or how does that work? Because something here too is like short games are easier to fit into your life, so you can replay them more often just by like function of like time constraints and not always being able to play games.
It's a good question. I think that it might come
Be
up
close.
close to some of the games at the bottom of my
Okay.
physically most played games. So we,
Yeah.
as you mentioned, we did our 5 most played digital games and our 5 most played physical games. And for me, I'm not a meticulous logger of plays.
Yeah.
So with the digital games, I can tell you exactly how many times I played each of these games because it's logged for me on the platforms I'm playing them on. But for physical games, I just made an educated guess. Like I
Yeah,
looked at
totally.
my shelf of games and thought, I think these are the ones that I've played the most that makes sense to include on this list. Like I haven't played Uno the most, but if I basically am not including things that I played like before 2015 when I first learned about the modern board game hobby.
Sure. No, that makes a ton of sense. I think I'm very much in the same boat. I used to log very meticulously and then I stopped completely because I found it to just be deterring from my fun. At the end of a session, instead of talking about games, I would just like go log games and be like, okay, and who won and how many points we have. So I don't do that anymore, but I know in some cases the exact count in some physical plays. But then for the most part, it's kind of like looking at my collection. I know these are the games that I've played at least across the board here 35 or more times for each of them. And some of
Nice.
them for physical plays getting up over 100. But we'll get to that in a minute.
The last thing I wanted to say, sort of from a meta analysis lens here, one thing that's just interesting to me when I put this list together is when I think about what are my favorite games, or when someone
Mm,
asks me, which happens all the time, and never have a good answer for it. But the games that come to mind are like midweight Euro games
yeah,
often.
yeah.
That I feel like those games really hit a nice sweet spot for me, but those are definitely not the games in my physical collection that are being played the most often. So it was just interesting to me. Where I am hitting those games and playing them a lot is in digital spaces where
Mm,
asynchronous play makes it fit into my life a lot easier, and I find and I can really dive deep and get full, rich enjoyment out of those decisions. So that was just interesting to me that, what I think of as my favorite board games are primarily either being played online or only a handful of times on the table.
yeah, totally. I think that's really interesting. Also, I don't want to have this aside now, but I really want us to, at a future point in the show, talk about this conversation of the song of dance of like talking to people who don't play games all the time about your favorite game. So I'm like, where do I start? Like, okay, so there's this
Let's
guy
just
named
do it
Reiner
now.
Knizia. Should we just do it now?
Yeah, let's do it now.
Okay, because like sometimes I find myself like, if you get that what's your favorite game question, it's so hard to contextualize it. I never know what to do with that question, right? Like, is someone asking what's my favorite game period, or like what's my favorite game that I like to introduce new people to? How nerdy do they want me to be?
And there should not be many more people who are like more qualified to answer that
The,
question than 2 people that have done 140 episodes of a board game podcast. And
yep,
yet my mind still goes completely blank.
I
The
know.
answer I give the most is the Castles of Burgundy,
Yeah,
just because that's like such a comfort game for me. It's always hovering around my top 5, top 3 games. I've played it a lot, as it'll come up later on this list. So I tend to go there, but it's an unsatisfying answer for me because I wouldn't want them to go pick up Castles of Burgundy if they've never
yeah.
played a modern Euro style board game before. And they're like, okay, cool. Like, what's that about? And I'm like, and now I'm in like a horrible situation where I'm like, well, you've got like a common supply of tiles, and you're taking those and trying to add them to your personal player board so that you can fill up your own little hexagon mat. And it's just like, like people's eyes are glazing over. So
This is
that's a
why sometimes I just
disaster.
say it's the resistance. It's like a little bit easier to like get the hooks of that game when I answer this question. I totally agree. Other times though, when I answer it, Jake, I'll go, "Oh, it's hard for me to pick a favorite game, but I can tell you about my favorite designer." And then I try to talk about Reiner Knizia, and then people just look at me with really glazed eyes, and they're like, "What name did you just say? Over 700 board games? What are you talking about?" So I don't know. This is a tough one. I guess I should just be like, my favorite game is Babylonia or Tigris and Euphrates, and just go deep. You know,
Yeah.
if I go ask someone about fermentation and they want to talk to me about some obscure bacteria that ferments like if I pose the question, I'm interested, right? Like talk to me about koji. For those of you who know about koji and koji fermentation, like if I'm going up to an enthusiast and I'm like, talk to me about fermentation, I ask for it. So I guess let's go deep.
I think I'm next time somebody asks me, I'm going to say A Feast for Odin, only because then if they ask me what it's about, I can go with the theme.
Yeah.
I can say like, oh, you're Vikings and you get to like go whale hunting and pillaging and like, get artifacts and bring them back to your hut and all that.
That has a good, okay, the hook there in the pitch is great because you can just say it's a Viking Tetris game.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, that takes 4 hours to play.
Yeah, you would absolutely hate it.
Okay, I feel like this was a good aside. Thank you for having us do it now. Let's get into our list.
Yeah, let's do it. So we're starting digital. Most played games digitally. And do you want to go back and forth, or should we just read off our list?
Ooh.
Let's go back and forth. That's better.
Let's go
right?
back and forth, yeah.
All right. Why don't you start with your honorable mention? I see you have an honorable mention here.
Yeah, okay, so before the show, Jake and I were talking, and I realized that I have played a game that I didn't think I'd played more than 100 times. So it bumped My City, my honorable mention, which I've played 84 times between digital and in-person play combined. Wait, no, that's just digital. Oh, yeah, I've played My City 84 times digitally, and I've played it probably 30 times physically. So this deserved to be on the list somewhere. It's an honorable mention. My City is unique because it's a game intended to be played lots of times. It's a game literally designed to be a light legacy game, so you can replay it a lot. And then it also has the Eternal mode, which Jake and I enjoy enough that we did a whole episode on it. And I think a huge part of why My City is just like eminently replayable is either in the legacy mode, the rules are always changing, which keeps the game fresh, right? It's not the same game. You play it twice, all 24 times you play it. It's a very similar game, but it's always different. Or in the Eternal mode, just the variance in the way that tiles come out, given the structure of scoring, means that every game just feels so different. And the puzzle is just so solid and resolute and interesting and at some sort of basic level that it's just really fun. So I think oh my gosh, are we breaking new ground here by saying games with good variability are replayable? I don't think so. But in the case of My City, that's a huge part of it,
I was thrown off when I looked at my Board Game Arena stats for most played game, and it said I'd played like 6 games of My City because 2 of those were campaign
That's funny.
that it logged as like a single one. So I've probably played it, at least 40 times myself. So it's definitely a replayable one, and that Eternal mode is one I think I'll be coming back to on the table more than most, just because it's such a good entry point to the hobby.
Yeah.
Okay, so my number 5 game is Bruges, the Stefan Feld game about the city of Bruges, where you will be placing boats, placing canal pieces, getting bonus actions from boats, building houses, paying people to reside in your houses, all kinds of things, just like in real life. But it's one of the Feld's absolute best, in my opinion. Amazing use of multi-use cards and a puzzle that I just keep coming back to over and over again. I think the thing that I love most about this game and what makes it so replayable to me is just how dynamic any play of the game is. I've talked about this a lot when I've talked about this game, but your band of scoring is huge based on the randomness in the game, but you can still play well. And, just because of the way the dice come out, maybe low numbers come out a ton, you can win this game and play well and score 40 points, or you can win this game and play well and score 126. And I think that makes it exciting because you just never know kind of what's going to happen when you start a game of Bruges.
Yeah. Bruges has a lot in common with my number 5 most played digital game, which is Star Realms, which I've played over 100 times just in preparation for our episode show, and had probably played it more than 200 times before, like many years ago, which is that they're both highly tactical games, right? Star Realms and Bruges are games where you can go in with a sense of if this strategic path presents itself, it's a good one to take. But in both the games, very different systems, you're presented with sort of options to build your strategy, and then have to tactically go into what the best path that you can find. And I think part of what makes Star Realms really fun is there's certain strategies I want to pursue when presented with the opportunity, but you're always kind of mix and matching, trying to put together the best deck possible given the card market that's there, given the cards you started with and what your opponent's doing, in a way that's really endlessly fun, where you're kind of always pursuing the perfect deck, but can never just like strategically decide, oh, I'm going to go and playing green. I'm going to play a blob strategy. Like that just won't work. So a huge part of what makes that fun is it feels really fresh every time you go back and play. Star Realms also is really quick, so that helps too.
Okay, how much of the replayability of Star Realms to you is that it has a really great app implementation that like logs your victories and successes
Yeah.
and you can rank up?
Okay, I think in the Star Realms case, that made a moderate impact. And a game later in my list, it is far and away what made that the case, but it has to do with Board Game Arena. But I'm really glad you brought that up, Jake, because I do think you and I both, to varying degrees, have probably played these games in part in a digital space because of the meta incentives of ranking up in a game, which just feels good. So I think
Yeah,
it's not nothing for sure.
that's a good point. And even though Bruges doesn't have that same type of ranking,
Yeah.
it is a game that's offered to play free online on Yukata, one of the best online platforms for playing games alongside Board Game Arena. And that has sort of a meta ranking up system, which I think is incredibly addicting personally. And one of the coolest sort of ranking systems. So instead of just leveling up in one game, like exists in Board Game Arena, you can kind of like gain more proficiencies with the game, or if you play the Arena League, you can get higher ranks. On Yukata, everything is global, so to go up from one rank to the next, there's a bunch of different requirements you need to tick off. So one might be you have to win a certain number of games. When you're level 1, you just have to win one different game, but by the time you're level 15 to rank up, you'll have to win 16 different games and best a certain number of opponents, and have elo over a certain point in a certain number of games. So it forces you to go wide, playing 16, winning at 16 different board games, and deep, becoming like proficient in certain ones as well. So I think that's awesome how it like incentivizes both ends of the hobby, and it's been really fun challenging myself to rank up.
I mean, your digital list reads as like your favorite games on Yukata. I think for a reason.
Yeah, so that was
Yeah.
going to segue into my next one, which is Hey, That's My Fish, a game I've played 70 times, and one that I'm always queuing up whenever I rank up to a new level, because I know I can get wins in it relatively. It doesn't take too long. That's a
Yeah.
huge selling point for it. Um, and I'm not like the best at it, but if I just queue up 5 games of Hey, That's My Fish, I feel pretty confident I'm going to win one. But anyway, Hey, That's My Fish is a podcast, is a game that we've also had a podcast episode about, just like Bruges and Star Realm. So that's another maybe a meta trend we're noticing, that games that we had an episode on and prepared for are
Yeah.
showing up on these digital lists. But it's a game, an area control game where you have penguin figures on a board of hexagon tiles that have fish on them. And whenever you land on a tile, you take it off the board and add it to your personal supply of fish. And it's possible to cut off your opponents and leave them isolated on a small iceberg, and while you scoop up all the rest of the fish. So it's a very satisfying, very confrontational area control game that I absolutely love. And it's also perfect for digital play because it's just an absolute pain in the ass to set up that hex board on the table for a game that then it's like the quintessential game that takes as long to set up as it does to play.
Yeah. But it's really fun when you're making the decisions in the
Yeah,
actual
it's really
play.
fun to play.
Yeah. Okay, so my number 4 most played digital game is the Lost Ruins of Arnak. This is a game that I've played 117 times on Board Game Arena. So Arnak's an interesting one. This for me is one of the heavier games on my list. It's a midweight Euro game that's very tactical in nature because this is another deck building game. Though some people might kind of turn their nose up at that, but I think Arnak's a deck building game. It's just not sort of in the classic Dominion style mold.
Definitely has
So
deck building elements.
Yep. And the tools that you're amassing follows a similar deck building sort of trope of there's a market out there, you're pulling cards from that market into your deck to use for later. I think for me, a huge part of why Arnak was so replayable is that I felt the learning curve really immediately. Like I felt like the more I played it, the better I was getting in a really satisfying way. And I think something about a lot of the games on my list, or something that I want to talk about with replayability, is that I think a huge incentive for me to replay games is feeling like I'm getting better at them the more I play. I think that's true of a lot of games, but if I can play games quickly-ish and also get better at them fairly quickly, like if there's a nice learning curve, right? It's not too steep. It's not like Go, which I found to be really difficult to learn, a really steep, punishing learning curve. I think Arnak was just right. So after around 100 games, I felt like I really understood the system. It's not too complex. There's enough little heuristics in the game that you can kind of pick up on things. But I felt like my investment in time, I was learning and getting better and better. So I wanted to keep playing and keep getting better until I kind of leveled off and felt like, okay, I kind of have mastery of as much as I want to put in the effort in the system. Any more learning beyond this point, I'd probably have to study and invest more time than I want. To like really overanalyze the cards, overanalyze everything that's going on in a way that would take the fun out of it a little bit. But I think that that's a huge part of it. Is replayable games for me are games where the learning curve is just the right slope, where I have an incentive to keep learning. It's not too steep where it takes so much effort to get better, or too, what's the opposite of steep, Jake? Totally blanking.
Mellow.
Okay, mellow. Great. It's not too mellow of a slope where I play it twice and I feel like, okay, I've grokked this game, right? Like there's not much of a learning curve in a game like Tic-Tac-Toe, so it's not that real play.
I feel like you're actually like attacking me for the next game on my list, but
this is a whole different genre of replayability, I think.
Yeah, but I think one of the interesting things here for me, I'm curious how this tries on for you for Arnak, is that it was a game when I first played it, I was like, this is fun, but is it good? And then I played it a little bit more and thought, I'm still having fun. I'm still not sure how good this game is.
Yeah.
And then I played it a little bit more and I thought, this game must be good because I'm still playing it and still having fun. You know, I don't know. Do you think there's anything to that with the replayability where if the game just hits you with all cylinders at the very start and is amazing, sometimes I might feel as though that was great, but I've got the whole experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Like chasing the high of a good play over and over again. Like if it just starts so amazing, like maybe that's just enough and you're going to walk away. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Sometimes you hear people say things like the game went on too long because I achieved everything that I wanted to achieve, so it didn't leave me wanting more.
Yeah.
Do you think the same thing can be true of a game that's not necessarily that you were able to accomplish everything or not, but is just the perfect play has already been achieved, you know? I'm never going to recreate that.
I think so, but it's so interesting that you mentioned this with Arnak, because Arnak has this whole system, right, where you move up this, it's essentially like a complex scoring track on the right side that's this temple track. It's obligated that you move up, but depending on how well you navigate it and how efficient you are with your resources, you can unlock these like extra special tiles at the very end that are gold. And a couple plays, just only a couple in my 117 plays, have I gotten 2 of those tiles in one play. And I think a huge part of why I wanted to keep replaying was sort of doing that early on and thinking, how can I do that again? Right. And I think you have a similar thing sometimes with Castles of Burgundy, where it's like, how close can I really get to a perfect play?
Yeah.
Like
definitely.
You want to play the perfect game.
Yeah. Well, I should probably jump over to my next game on my list. Another very light game on Yukata that I've used to rank up, but also I've played a ton because I think it's genuinely very fun. And it's actually my favorite push your luck game, Claim It. Brendan, we played Claim It together once, right?
I think
I got you to play it with me. What did you think of Claim It?
I thought it was sort of silly, but fun. It's kind of like Can't Stop, but you add an extra dimension of spatial element. And for a game with like spatial elements, sometimes your agency doesn't feel quite as high, but you sometimes have these like amazing push your luck turns that are just so fun. So I think that I totally understand why this is one of your most replayed games, especially push your luck games are just good in digital. You some like they go faster. You can just push a button and see the outcome. You don't have to like pick up and roll dice, think through all your options. They're easier to see. Yeah, I don't know. I think Claim It's fun. I think Claim It's another where it's sort of like seeing what could happen and watching that borne out in the play of it is just fun because the bell curve of bad and good turns is so fully expressed in the play.
Can't stop with a spatial element is exactly what it is. For
Yeah.
those who don't know, you roll 3 dice, and 2 you will place on the edge of a grid, so the x-axis and the y-axis, and where those two over intersect each other, you can place your own marker and claim that area of the board. But you can only do that if you have a marker available with the value of the third dice that you've rolled.
Yeah.
So if you ever cannot do that, you bust and have to pick up all the markers that you've claimed this turn. If you have your dice intersect on a marker that is already yours that you own, then you can top it off with a black claim it token, and that's permanent as long as you don't bust this round, and then that'll be never come off the board, and then you just score biggest contiguous area at the end of the game. So very light, very silly, fun push your luck game that I think fits perfectly in with what you're saying of games that for me this game is definitely light, definitely random, but there's enough skill development there. You can never, be so much better at this game than somebody else that you're going to win even 55% of the time probably,
Yeah.
but you can still improve and just like push against this really small margin to be better. But it's interesting to me how without actually, increasing your overall win percentage that much, there's a ton of ability to improve within the smallest like links of this skill chain, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Totally. And I think that's so interesting because the next game on my list is Tigris and Euphrates, a game I've played more than 123 times digitally and on the table even more. But Tigris is totally different, right? Because it's one where the skill ladder is so high that like the better player wins significantly more than a weaker player at the table. Like among 4 players, I think more often than not, the best player will win like probably 70% of the time,
Oh yeah,
Is it
for
is it
sure.
maybe even more? It's a very skill
I think
testing game.
more. Yeah.
Yeah, this is one where there's a lot of variance because you're drawing a hand of tiles that are going to dictate the moves that you can take or the strategic paths that you can take. So there's lots of skill in sort of learning how to play your hand, learning how to observe the table and figure out what other people's objectives are and how you're going to try to manipulate the shape of the board to get there. Tigris is one where the learning curve is somewhat steep and somewhat long, but the decision space is just so big and so open. There's so many tactics that you can learn, so many different strategic sort of I don't want to say like it's not just like set strategies, but sort of like strategic like
It's chess-like
options.
in a way,
Yeah.
right? You kind of, and that's what I was gonna ask you for this one is part of the replayability in learning different openings and ways to counter them, as in chess, obviously an extremely replayable game to millions of people.
Yeah.
Does this have that makes it replayable to you?
I think the openings are a huge part of it now that I think of it more. It's really fun to be able to play the game more and understand and think through, okay, given the board state after opening, everyone sort of open in this way, how should I approach how aggressive I want to be based on my first tile draws, how defensive I need to be, when is my moment to sort of push. You have these really important tiles that are catastrophe tiles that let you meaningfully reshape the board, but you only have 2 of them. So it's this like very agency increasing mechanism because you can use them rarely, but they'll impact the board really greatly. That ends up being really skill testing. I think that's for sure a part of it, Jake. Another huge part of it is it just feels really good to win. I think Tigris and Euphrates is a game I like to play where there's 2 versions. You can play with hidden scoring or revealed scoring. I really like it with hidden scoring. It makes the reveal at the end very fun. So there's just a lot of tension all the way throughout the game. I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever get tired of it. There's something that is just like endlessly interesting about it to me. And I feel like I'm just constantly getting better. Like I feel like if I played Tigris 500 more times, I would be significantly better than I am now. In fact, I can't believe I'm not playing a game right now on Board Game Arena. I need to go start one.
Brendan has been in the over 100 plays this entire list, but I'm only getting there now with my second most played digital game, The Castles of Burgundy, at 144 plays. We already talked about this game earlier in the podcast, but I think part of the thing that makes this game replayable to me is that it's a very comforting game to me. I know it so well. I
Yeah.
have such well-defined heuristics that I can just play this game and I'll in some ways, not even think and just have a really good time. Of course, there are still interesting decisions that make it fun, that make me stop and consider and think, "Wow, I don't know if I've seen this exact situation before." But I also think the bigger part of it, quite honestly, is the emotional aspect of this game being one of the first ones that really hooked me with Euro games. Period. When I'm playing this, it's easy to think back to being in that apartment with the friends I sort of discovered this hobby with, and just those like really happy times. And I can still tap into a piece of that through this game, and I think that's part of the reason I always want to go back to it and play it both digitally and on the table.
I think another huge part, if I can observe from the outside as someone who's watched your relationship with Castles of Burgundy grow over the course of the past few years too, is that you're really good at the game. And I think there's a lot of joy in doing something that you're good at and just being good at it. Like there's certain meals that I'm good at cooking and I like to cook them because it's fun to be like, this is a tough thing to cook. I just nailed it. It feels good to nail something that I'm good at and have gotten good at. And I think for me, watching you play Castles a little bit, there's like, yeah, I just don't. Like, like there's something to like, I've invested time and now I get to like bear out the fruits of my efforts and like watch myself do something cool because I've put in the time.
I think you're right about that. And it's nice in a game like Castles of Burgundy, as I'm sure it is in a game like Tigris and Euphrates, in that it's a game that a lot of people play and a lot of people care about, right?
Yeah.
So you'll always be able to find people who are also really good
Good.
at the game
Yeah.
to like match wits with. And that's part of the thing that makes it fun. It's not just dunking on inexperienced newbies, but there's a ton of really good players in our Discord that sometimes I win, sometimes I don't, but playing against them is a really enjoyable experience.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Should we? Well, no, we shouldn't do it. Well, my number 4 most played game is Jake's
And my
most
number
played
one,
game.
yeah.
Yeah. Should we
So
just
let's
do it
talk
together?
about yeah.
Okay. So I've played this game 138 times.
And I played 185 times, and it's a game that came out just this year.
Did we cover it on the show?
So people already know probably what we're talking about. Probably our game of the year, Challengers.
Yeah. I feel like we've talked almost ad nauseum about challengers on the show at this point.
I've seen
But
it like externally, like on Reddit. Some people were discussing Challengers and like the decisions-based podcast loves this game.
oh, really?
So,
That's awesome. Yeah, like if we've hit Reddit's shores, yeah, clearly we've talked about it a lot. The thing about challengers this has a little bit of what we talked about with Star Realms, right? Like the thing that makes challengers endlessly replayable is the mix and match ability of how tactical it is and how many different strategic paths there are. You're always taking these like strategic tool pieces, these little combo pieces or whatever, and putting them together in new ways and angling for certain options, really playing to your outs. It's also a game that you can get better at significantly quickly, but then keep getting better at the more you invest time in, right?
It has both. Like you get
yeah,
really good fast, and then once you've hit the point that you're like a good, competent player at the game, it's difficult to like continue to improve your win rate that much. But it has that claim it thing where you're still improving in like
yeah.
smaller and smaller ways. But it kind of doesn't matter that it's smaller because like just be like, okay, I just got like a tiny bit better. It still feels just as good.
And Challengers 100% has the joy of that you experience of like playing Claim It and having one of those like bombastic, amazing turns where it's like, how did this just happen? My luck is so good. Because in Challengers, sometimes you just open a bonkers combo and you just like roll over the whole game and it feels amazing. And there's something really fun about playing games that play somewhat quickly when sometimes you just open a juicy, disgusting deck or juicy, disgusting combos and you get to experience it and play. Like there's something really empowering about that. That's fun.
I feel like Challengers is hitting a ton of the things we've talked about in the other games, right?
Yeah.
It has like a really satisfying
Learning curve.
skill arc, learning curve.
Yep.
It makes you kind of hunt for that perfect deck, right?
Yeah.
And those like moments where you just like achieve something great, you want to like keep going back to try to hit that. It's a relatively fast game that, if I'm being honest, probably plays. It's really fun to play in person, but the fact that you can play it in 20 minutes on a digital implementation makes it maybe even best there. Or, I don't know. Not probably my best experiences with Challengers has still been playing in person, but it's just amazing to play online because of like how much it gets all the administrative burden of dealing out cards, shuffling cards out of your way. And yeah, so I mean, maybe it's not a big surprise that it's been so replayable to us beyond loving the game, because it does hit all of these other boxes we've been talking about.
Yep. And interestingly, Jake, for me, okay, Star Realms has drafting, more or less. You're drafting from an open tableau. Arnak has drafting. Challengers has drafting. And then my number one most played game digitally is a drafting game that I played 726 times on Board Game Arena. Oh, it's Seven Wonders. This is okay. So Seven Wonders, I think is the more I've played it, which I guess I can say, since I played it 726 times, is a good game. It's fine. It's pretty good. I like it a lot, I think. It's pretty good. But I think the thing about Seven Wonders and why I've played it 726 times is because it's fast. It's a game you can play in under 10 minutes on Board Game Arena. It's also, drafting games are just fun for what I just talked about. Like there are times where you just pop off in a way that's really exciting. Chasing those sort of edge case tail outcomes are fun. It's also a game with a somewhat like a good learning curve. You can get better at Seven Wonders. As you learn the card pool, you can make more meaningful decisions. And this is a game where no doubt chasing ranking on Board Game Arena made me play it more. Because for a while I was like, I'm going to try to get over 400 ELO or whatever. And I got sort of way too into it, being like, I'm going to grind and really play because I think I can push myself there. And then got there, then fell back, did the whole thing. But I like Seven Wonders. I think it's relaxing in a way that a lot of games aren't, because it's somewhat solitary. You're doing a little bit of trading. You're looking at your direct neighbors for potential conflicts. You just look at other people's cards because you're drafting from a shared pool. But for the most part, it's not too interactive. This is one, Jake, that's just like a comfort game at this point for me, where it's kind of like Castles of Burgundy for you, where I don't have to think about it too much. I can kind of see what happens. I think, though, now that I've played it 726 times, I've played it enough. At this point, I'd rather play something else.
It's fascinating to me that this is the only game in this list that we haven't covered on the podcast.
I know.
If I had played a game that many times, I would be demanding, And also, interestingly, I've never played it even once.
Oh, really? So
Yeah.
this is Seven Wonders was probably my third or fourth sort of modern board game that I bought too. So I think that contributed to it.
Yeah.
I played it a lot back then, and it was one where I was like always trying to get my friends to play it, but it was a little bit of an extra step for them. Though if I brought Keyflower or this, which literally used to happen, everyone would be like, "Oh, Seven Wonders, keep that box away from us." So I did get some plays of it. But I think when I found it on,
Keyflower, good for something.
yeah, I mean, good for me. But I think when I found it on Board Game Arena, it was also, I was just excited to be able to play it a ton
Yeah.
and explore it in a way that I felt like I didn't always get to do on the table, because it's a little sluggish on the table.
I think also maybe it's not too much to say that for us, at least, drafting and card drafting is a mechanism that offers, when done well,
Endless
offers
replayability.
more replayability than other mechanisms.
Yeah. It's just, well, exactly. Like you have the dice drafting of Castles of Burgundy. You like
There's draft. Yeah, it's kind of drafting, right? Where you're taking the tiles.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I guess it's not really drafting in Castles.
I mean, it's an edge case. Like you're definitely trying to get tiles, but I don't think it fits in it in the same way of like cards and combos.
What about in Bruges?
No, it's not either.
There's no drafting in Bruges, right?
No, I think it's just like, I think for these two games, it's just like really great mechanisms, and particularly for asynchronous play.
Yeah.
You can't really beat the one turn puzzle
Yeah.
offered by Castles of Burgundy and Bruges.
Yeah. I think you're totally right.
But
That's
anyway,
yeah.
so those are our digital games, and we should move on to our physical games, and then maybe we'll have time for some closing thoughts. So I think it's my turn since you were just talking about Seven Wonders, and I'm going to start with, again, these are not necessarily in the correct order, but one game that makes my list, I put it at number 5, is Kingdomino. I
Mm,
think that this is a incredible entry point to the board gaming hobby. It's one I often break out to show people because it's so quick, plays great on the table. It's easy to get people onboarded into and understand what's going on right away. It's also one that allows people to kind of have an aha moment during the game about why it's so clever. And so, for all those reasons, it's an excellent gateway game.
yeah.
And it's one that I've introduced to tons of people at this point, and I just still really enjoy playing it. It's one I like playing online. I think it's great at a two-player mode in the Mighty Duel, but my favorite way is to play at 3 or 4 player in the traditional way and just have a blast.
Yeah. Another one we've done an episode on. Amazing
I
game.
probably played it like, but for me, and this, I've probably played it like 15 times on the
Nice.
table. So
Okay.
that's sort of like where my in person plays are. It's
Yeah.
much less across the board than digital ones, which isn't surprising. But really, I don't tend to go as, this is another meta thing. I think I don't go as deep as you
Yeah.
typically in games, but I wonder if like I have more like medium depth games. Like I'm just curious. I don't know if this is true or not. If I maybe have more like
10 to
30
15
to
plays.
60 played games online or like 10 to 15 played
Yeah.
games in person.
I think that's right. I tend to find what I like and then I go really hard on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And then bounce off other things. So, one game that I didn't bounce off of is The Fox in the Forest. This is a trick taking game that I played with my wife Maya a ton. We've probably played this game well over 50 times. It's easy to take with you. Like we used to take this just to restaurants and stuff and play it while we were waiting for food. This is another game that we did an episode on very early, and one that I think the learning curve is really nice on, because you're meta learning how to manage your hand to play with these different powers that come out, but also learning how to juggle between, do I want to be winning tricks or losing tricks, which is really rewarding. I think the other thing about The Fox and the Forest is it's just like with trick taking games, it kind of has the similar thing of being hyper tactical in terms of your dealt a hand, and then you have to figure out how to get out of it. In the same way, when you're playing a drafting game, you're dealt a hand and you have to figure out how to get out of it, more or less, right? Like get the best path out of it. Both these sort of genres kind of dip their toes into that space.
Yeah, I put Fox in the Forest on my list too as number 4, and for similar reasons as King Domino. This was one that I played a ton with my wife, which is kind of rare for me. We don't tend to play games together that often, but this was a 2-player game that we did kind of get into a pattern of playing a lot. Eventually, it fell out of favor with us, so I wouldn't say it's kind of one of my favorite games in the same way as it is for you, though I do think it's an incredible. I think it's like a game where it's like you can't fault the design. It's like a
Yeah,
perfect
it is
design.
a perfect design. Yeah.
But I just don't know that it works as well for me. But it's still one I've played a ton and makes this list. I've probably played it about 20 times.
Okay, I have two quick caveats. One, listeners don't know this, but I just reordered my list, and I think I want to make it clear, Jake, that I didn't do that to preempt you. I just wanted to get it in the actual order of most played, because I moved Fox in the Forest to the bottom. So I didn't do that so I could just talk about it first. So I got to get that off my chest. And then number 2 is caveat for me. I'm not including Ramen Ramen, Enchanted Plumes, or Unrest in my list. Those are games of my own design. So I've played all of those games easily over 200 times. I think Enchanted Plumes I've probably played over 500 times. I don't want to venture a guess about the other two and be wrong. But I didn't feel like I should include those here. I think playtesting games is kind of a different beast. So I didn't want to include them, but I've played those games probably more than any other games in my entire life on the table, which is, I think, how it should probably be. Okay, my next game is Babylonia. So Tigris and Euphrates, I've played a ton in digital. Babylonia has a really good 2-player version that makes it easier to get to the table for me in a physical play than a game like Tigris and Euphrates. I love both these games. They're really different. Maya and I, my wife, got really into Babylonia together last year and played it probably 40 to 50 times between the two of us, and then also playing with other people. This is another one where there's an episode on the show where we discuss Babylonia, but in this instance, the we is not Jake and I, but Maya and I. Babylonia is fun. You have a hand of tiles. It's different every time. The cities and the incentives are always shifting. So, like, literally, the fun of replaying Babylonia for me is that the variability is just so good. Like, there's no other way to put it. It's just great.
Number 3 for me is a game that is replayable by demand.
Okay.
It's a game that I had to unburden myself from owning because it was the only thing my friends ever wanted to play when they came over. And it's Monikers, a very silly party game where you have to guess cards that your opponents will be either giving clues about verbally, in the second round, 1-word clue, and in the third round, charades for where it really feels like you're creating an inside joke with your friends in the short time it takes to play the game. Monikers is awesome. It's a really fun game. I probably played it 25, 30 times. And I still enjoy playing it, but I enjoy being the person requesting the game went over somewhere else, as opposed to have you ever had that where like a game becomes so popular with friends and that they even like it more than you, and then you have to say just like done bringing
Yeah,
this out?
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in this case, so I don't play Monikers, I play Celebrity. And I think if I had a physical thing around, I would have remembered to put it on my list because I've also played this game a million times.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm finding that for my most played games on the table, it's not necessarily my favorite games in all cases.
Yeah.
Um, but nevertheless, a credit to them that they made me get it to the table, or my friends forced me to get it to the table by being such a big hit there. I think code names and wavelength more and more are starting to kind of fall into this category too, which is to say awesome games, but I just don't think I could have like the capacity to play like one party game like 100 times. Like I just
Yeah.
need to I need to change it up and do something else. So
Totally.
it
That's
was
a
kind of
huge
code
part.
names, then monikers, and now it's sort of like wavelengths time at the
Nice.
moment.
That's awesome. That's a huge part of just the difference with physical games, right? Is because you're limited by the people you have, the time that you have, the space that you have. So I think that's why we're having this like, oh, this isn't one of my favorite games, but it's one of the easiest to get to the table. So that's why it's on my list. Or
Yeah,
groups, it becomes the lowest common denominator that makes everyone happy. So we play it a lot, right?
great point. Hmm.
For me, the next game on my list is one that shockingly we don't talk about on the show that much. And it's Dominion. So Maya and I got super into Dominion before The Fox in the Forest and Babylonia. We bought the base game, played it a ton, then bought the Hinterlands expansion, which is not one people talk about a lot in sort of the top echelon of expansions, but it's one that I just sort of researched, found, and loved. We both really enjoy it. So I think probably we've played Dominion 100 times. I haven't played Dominion. Maya and I haven't played Dominion in probably 5 years. It hit us hard and fast and deep, and I think we've kind of gotten our fix, and now we've moved on to other things. But Dominion's another one where it's just like the variability is so great because you're always playing with different card pools. It's a deck building game, so the variance of what comes out and chasing that perfect play is there. Dominion is just great. No one's shocked that Dominion's on my most replayed games list, I don't think, just because this is one of those games where like people have bought every expansion that's in existence, have 5,000 cards, and it's kind of their lifestyle. Though less so lately.
Though I think Dominion continues to put out new content that does
Yeah.
well, right? People buy it.
Adventures. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
like new stuff still coming out.
Do you think it's worth getting into Dominion today? I'm asking for a friend. Let's say I have a friend who's only played Dominion once in his life and had a good time with it. Do you
Wow.
think that this individual, who will go nameless to protect their privacy, uh, would enjoy a deep dive into Dominion in 2023?
Interestingly, if I had a friend whose name rhymed with lake, who had only played Dominion once, would I recommend they explore it? Yes, I think so. I think yes. I don't know for sure that. Gosh, this is toughie. I think
So
yes, but
dropping the annoying charade,
it's
I
you.
think I have a little bit of like Halifax Hammer thing going on in my head where
Oh,
like I hear like okay Dominion like big money
oh no, no, no,
strategy.
no,
No.
no. That's don't worry about that. It's not as bad as it seems like it is. I think that you would dig it, but I think one interesting thing about Dominion, right, is it like came out, it did deck building, it made deck building. So you've experienced so much of the novelty of Dominion that I think made it so fun for me and Maya back when we played it 100 times across two things. Like you've seen the magic trick. It's still a really good game, but a lot of the magic might not be there because the magic trick was so good that everyone just spent the subsequent 15 years emulating it.
But I do like a stagnant pool of cards for my deck builders more than like a dynamic row of cards.
I think if you were gonna try Dominion, you should, but you should not start with the base Dominion. I don't think the cards
Yeah,
are a little
go
more simple. I would
go
pick
with
like
like a little
an expansion.
there's a way to play it online, right? Like a
I think
Dominion
there
dot games
is.
or something.
Yeah,
Okay, let's
maybe
put
we
that
should
on the back
explore it.
burner. I think
Okay,
it might be yeah, okay. I'll talk to my friend
okay, that sounds
and get
good.
back to
Talk to
you.
your friend. Yeah, yeah. Let me know. Let me know what he thinks.
Okay, back to me. The game I have as my number 2 most played. It's maybe really closer to 3 or 4, but it is one that I've spent a lot more time with, and that's Arkham Horror: The Living Card Game. So I've played the base game campaign, which is 3 scenarios, at least 2 or 3 times, and then I have the whole second cycle, the Dunwich Legacy, and I've done that once with a group of friends, once solo, and then I started another campaign. I think I've probably played somewhere in the realm of 20 games of Arkham Horror LCG. And I think this is going to become kind of like a theme for me as I get to the top of this list, which we're at now. I think one of the things that makes Arkham Horror LCG, if you're not familiar, it's a cooperative deck construction game. Where you're playing out episodes of a evolving and unfolding story. I think one of the things that makes it really replayable is that there's a lot to consider and think about when you're not playing the game. Like you can spend time trying to think about cool and interesting combos. There's a whole system of gaining experience that allows you to upgrade your deck at the end of each episode. And that's huge for replayability because you get the new cool card in your deck, the new combo that you just added, and it makes you want to play the next scenario to see how that works out. And on top of that, you want to see how the story is going to unfold, especially if it's your first time going through the story. It's an incredibly well done game. And the last thing that I would say makes it replayable is that it's a game that I find to be quite fun solo. I haven't been able to get like the energy to get it to the table lately just because it is incredibly onerous for me without like an expensive storage solution to like kind of go through everything, put together the encounter deck and the stuff that I need to actually play the game and get it all set up. But it's one I always think about, when I have some free time. It's like I could either do Arkham Horror, I could like go outside and play some disc golf. And I almost never pick Arkham Horror, but I think maybe this winter, as it starts getting a little bit darker earlier, a little less pleasant outside, I'll have time to finish my ongoing scenario and maybe even pick up some new stuff. That's kind of my goal. It's an awesome game and one that I want to go back to more than I actually end up getting it to the table for various reasons.
I think that the sort of theory crafting metagaming, not metagaming in the way that people normally say metagaming, but metagaming in the like there we can talk about the game and the meta of the game is a huge part of why we both got so into challengers too. Like picking apart the puzzle of that game together was a lot of fun, and a huge part of that was and with our decision space community too, and just thinking through
Yeah,
how the game could play out, I think is a huge part of the appeal.
it
And
felt
Dominion has that too.
it felt just to peel back the curtain. It felt so fun in challengers too because it felt like we were a little bit ahead of the curve with our
Yeah.
like brain trust. We had some of like the number 1 and 2 ranked people on BGA in there, and we were just kind of like really theory crafting, screenshotting our decks, screenshotting different decisions we were making. So that felt really fun to kind of be on like the inside of the development of the competitive meta, which has now gone way past me. But
Same, yeah.
yeah, that was cool.
I
Cool
think
while it lasted.
yeah, totally. For me, the next game is the Resistance. The Resistance is one of my most played games ever by far. It's just a game that hit on a community aspect for me in a different way than Challengers, not because we were trying to like unpack the game and level up together, but just because kind of similar to Monikers View became a game that I with certain game groups just became a comfort game that we would play whenever we had five. There's not a lot of other games that I would rather play than the Resistance necessarily that play somewhat quickly. It's easy to play a couple times in one sitting, and also is a game that I think kind of rewards it. You want a chance to play as the Resistance. You want a chance to play as the spy, maybe depending on your personality. And it's fun to just, I don't know, kind of like iterate and riff and play. The first game also, oftentimes, if there's new players, kind of ends up being a learning-ish game. So you can get a sense for like, how does the flow of this game work? So then I find I'm almost always playing at least twice, because if we put in the time to learn and have a learning game, we might as well play for real, quote unquote. The Resistance never gets bored because it's about trying to understand your friends and lie to your friends, which is an interesting thing to explore. And betrayal and sadness and also joy when you make it work. We might cover it on the show one day. I don't know. Resistance is awesome.
Yeah,
This is
it
another
is.
one. It's like the Fox and the Force. In my mind, it's like a perfect game. So it's
It
easy to play.
it could easily have been on my list too. I wouldn't be surprised if it is in my top 5. It's probably right on the edge of any of these games
Yeah.
because I've had a night or two of playing Resistance like 5 times.
Yeah.
And that gets up there pretty quickly. Yeah, it's a great game. And I always say this, it's sort of my I feel like it's like the board game that will like teach you the most important lesson about life. You know, I feel like it should be like part of our like education system. Like play this game, and then you'll know what it's like to be like accused of a crime.
Yeah. Totally.
So my number one, I kind of did a cheat here. I did Keyforge slash Magic the Gathering. The two games that I have played in like competitive tournament settings on the table. Um, the fact that I've done that for these games means that I've played a ton of games of practice on the table. I've done a ton of theory crafting between games, which makes me then want to go test out those theories. So that's a huge element of like top end on the table replayability for me. I don't typically want to do this for the games that I play, right? Like theory craft, try and like break the game and like understand it better than my opponent, because I only would want to do that if there is an established competitive scene of other like-minded people
Doing the
doing
same
the
thing.
same thing. You know, it would not be fun if I, whatever random Euro game we were playing at game night, if I, tried to learn all the strategies ahead of time so I could like beat my group, like I wouldn't do that. But for the select few games that have inspired me to participate at a competitive level, of course, those ones are going to be among the games that I've played the most. And so it's been Keyforge more for me since I kind of discovered this hobby. But Magic Gathering is another game that it's definitely the game I've played the most on the table throughout my life, and one that I still play maybe a dozen games of or so a year, maybe a little less than that, maybe like 6 to 8 games a year, but that still
That adds
adds
up.
up and makes it at the top of my list.
Okay, so Keyforge was exempted from my list, as was Magic the
Cheater.
Gathering. Jake and I love that we
Ooh.
always go a different way on this. It would be on my list too. I've played Keyforge over 1,000 times, for sure, easily.
Dang,
Like,
that's Enchanted Plumes numbers.
yeah, well, if only Enchanted Blooms had a digital adaptation, it'd be up there. But my number one most played physical game of all time is Cascadia. Cascadia is one of the only games that I have ever played through the entire score sheet of. This is a game, another one we did an episode on, that my wife, Maya, and I just got super into at the right time in our life when we had a lot of time. We were both on family leave after having our baby, and we played it a ton. It's another drafting game. In this instance, it's an entwined drafting game where you're drafting one of an animal tile and a terrain tile at the same time, or an animal token and a terrain tile. So those are overlaid in an interesting way that keeps the decisions really fresh. It's another one where sometimes you'll just have a perfect game come together, and you'll push to these new heights that you continue on to try to go back to and chase. And you do get better at it the more you play, but it's fairly limited in terms of the banding that the points allow, which I think for me makes it exciting when a game gets when you have a really great game, but you can still sort of punch back and improve at the game alongside who you're playing with. I like it most at 2. I think it drags a little bit at 3 and 4. So again, we just found the perfect place to play it. I find the puzzle really fun and rewarding. It tends to be a little bit more puzzly than a lot of games I often play, but that works well for a game that I want to play quickly, kind of heads down with my partner. So yeah, that's Cascadia, another game we did an episode on. Did I say that already?
Awesome. It's interesting how, getting into the closing thoughts here, it's interesting how games we played on the table, like external circumstances are so
Play a
huge.
huge role.
I mean, that's it sounds obvious now, but it wasn't really something I thought about when I was putting my list together, right? I just kind of looked at myself and thought, which of these have I played the most?
Yeah.
And now talking about it, it's like, well, yeah. Because, for you, like being on parental leave at the time that Cascadia came out and was hot, and then you just played it.
Went crazy.
Yeah, you just played it and played it and played it.
I think that's a really good
That explains why you love it so much, is the sleep deprivation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I think it's really interesting. We cover a huge part of what we do on the show is trying to go really deep in games. So we end up trying to play them at least a fair number of times, and digital makes that possible. And I think this is one of the first episodes we've done, Jake, where we kind of reflect on the differences between digital and physical play in terms of the way, like why we're drawn to different games in different contexts, in those two contexts, in kind of a like fun, rewarding way. And I think for me, this question of like which games are ultimately more replayable is kind of it's tough. It kind of depends on the context, like you're saying.
I honestly, for me, one lesson that I'm learning is replayability of a game matters a lot more if it's a game that I want to play digitally than one on the table.
Yeah. Like you're happy to have one or two amazing plays on the table and have that be your experience of a game.
And that might be a game that I'm still happy to own, because maybe I'll go back to it someday and enjoy it, or just once every couple of years or something like that. And that's kind of okay for me. I think another kind of important piece of the puzzle is like, when I first started playing board games, I had fewer games and I played those games more. It'd be difficult, I think, for me, barring like external circumstances changing, for a new game to come out and all of a sudden be one of my most played at the table, just because of the way I enjoy games. So that's something I should really think about and consider when buying a new game. Is it worth buying this to play it once or twice and have a really good time with it?
Totally. And this is also a bias we should be aware of when we're covering games on the show, in terms of knowing about ourselves that we tend to like games that have more replayability when we play them digitally. That's something that's good for us to be aware of as we're like playing and exploring games and factoring them into how we think of. In some ways, it's kind of like the hook of the show. Like, let's replay a game a bunch and see what we learn.
Good.
Yeah. But I think nonetheless, it's
and of course, lots of other people play games differently, right? I think a lot of people in our Discord primarily are playing games over and over on the table, and that's awesome. I love that for them.
Totally. Well, I think this is a really good exploratory conversation.
Yeah, it's so interesting kind of having the juxtaposition of digital and physical games in the same episode. So I think a really good concept, Brendan. I think this was an interesting conversation.
And I'm still really interested in the potential for what we talk about replayability. So if you, wonderful listener, would like to share your thoughts on replayability with us, and if you've learned anything from our conversation, come into our Discord at decisionspacepodcast.com. You can find a link to it, or you can find a link to it in the show notes. Discord is just like a chat room in your browser. Come and tell us what you think of this episode and what you think about replayability, what you learned, and maybe we can mine it and do a future what we talk about on it.
Can't wait to see everyone's most played games as well. That'll be, I think, really interesting just to know about the people that we're chatting with in Discord all the time. So please do share those. And until next week, we should thank Hembry for our intro and outro song, Reach Out. And we'll catch you next week.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.